And we kick off this evening with a look at the cinema.
I'm not a complicated man. I like cinema.
It's beautiful, beautiful cinema.
Cinema history come to life.
I found my solace in the small cinema I went to every Thursday night.
I'm a professor of cinema.
I go to the cinema for the stories.
There was no competition between the cinema and seminar.
I mean, it's not within the realm of conventional cinema.
And now,
here's Payson Johnson
with a cinema review.
It is Monday, June 29th, 2026, and thank you for joining me for another episode of Cinemaster's Reviews. I'm your host, Payson Cinemaster Johnson, and we have an exciting review this week. We are going to be reviewing Supergirl, the newest entry in the DC universe, as well as Jackass Best and Last, the fifth and final film in the Jackass franchise. Might be a shorter episode this week. I say we jump right in, starting with our review of the biggest movie that opened this weekend, Supergirl. Supergirl, directed by Craig Gillespie. This is the newest film in the DC universe that started last year with James Gunn's Superman. This one follows the character that was introduced in that one briefly, Supergirl, played by Millie Alcock. We are introduced to Supergirl on this planet where she is essentially traveling to different red planets in order to find ways that she can be underpowered, so that way she can get drunk, so that way she can experience things that she can't experience on Earth, where she is obviously superpowered. While she is on this red sun planet, she ends up teaming up with an unlikely companion by the name of Ruth, played by Eve Ridley. Her parents have been killed by this ancient alien demon by the name of Krem, played by Matthias Schoenaerts, and initially Kara is resilient to help out Ruth because she's sort of like, hey, not really my problem. I don't want to get involved in any interplanetary issues, but Krem ends up harming Supergirl's dog, and so Supergirl now needs to travel in order to find the cure that only Krem has, and along the way decides to take Ruth with her in order to help Ruth get her revenge. I was a big fan of the Superman from last year. I think it was a big breath of fresh air for Warner Brothers and DC in terms of their superhero movies. I was not the biggest fan of Man of Steel, so I really like this new direction for the franchise. If it was going to be taking that mold where it seemed like it was going to be embracing its comic book roots, it was going to be embracing the optimism of the Superman character. So knowing that this was going to be the next film in the franchise, I was hopeful. I was like, okay, I really liked Superman. Let's see how the next chapter in this universe is going to be handled. Because I know it's technically not a sequel because while David Cornsweet's Superman is in this, he's in it very briefly, and it's very much Supergirl's movie, and it's very much her own story. So I was hopeful for this movie, and while I can say, just like in that movie where I really loved the brief moments we saw of Millie Alcock as Supergirl, I think Millie Alcock is excellent as the character of Kara in this movie. The rest of the movie surrounding her really isn't that great, and it really made me wish, as I was watching this movie, that Millie Alcock would have had a far better film. And watching this film, I don't want to say the DC universe is necessarily in trouble because they're still 1 for 2 at the same time. It felt like one of the more quaint and just throwaway comic book movies I've seen in a while. This movie, like I said, this movie opens up not as any sort of origin story. We open up with Supergirl being very used to her powers, being very used to her personality. She is someone who has very much been like sort of jaded with her life on Earth. She is not as hopeful as Clark Kent. She is not as optimistic. She is someone that sort of sees the darkness in everyone, is just trying to get by in the best possible way she can. She spends her days going from planet to planet, finding ways to party, to get drunk, to do anything that she can sort of like find any sort of buzz with. And while I didn't necessarily dislike the idea that this movie isn't necessarily an origin story, with the amount of flashbacks we get to Krypton showing her life before she was shot down to Earth, it really had me puzzled why Craig Gillespie didn't just tell a Supergirl origin story, because so much of this movie is just spent in boring, just sort of like gaudy flashbacks of just seeing like these like white production sets of all these characters in white robes going around white sets, like sort of like saying this is what it means to be a Kryptonian, this is what it means to be a superhero, this is why you must fight for what's good. And the fact the movie is always cutting back and forth between these flashback scenes really doesn't give the movie any sort of momentum, as we're following this very simple story of these two characters that are trying to find this one villain. One of them wants to save her dog, one of them just wants revenge, and it didn't really feel like there was any sort of like real like hardcore momentum in the story going forward. And I think that did have to do with the fact that we kept on cutting back to Supergirl's life previously, and as I was watching his flashbacks, I kept wondering why we didn't necessarily do just a full-on origin story about Supergirl. I understand that we seem to, as an audience, we seem to have gotten a little tired of origin stories in general for superheroes. Superman isn't really like an origin story because we open up on him having been a superhero for a couple of years now, but for a character like Supergirl, I think the general audience isn't like the most familiar with that character. I know her from some of the comics I've read, from some of the cartoons I've watched. I haven't read the Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow comic written by Tom King that I believe this movie was based off of. But I think we could have handled like a full-on origin story if that's what the that is what Craig Gillespie was interested in, because I think the cutting back and forth between present day to life on Krypton really just didn't give this movie all that much of momentum going forward. As I said, the story feels so low stakes to the point where I found it very, very hard to care. I'm someone that always says sometimes making a movie with slightly lower stakes but more personal to the characters can actually be beneficial, because it can put you in the character's mindset more. And you do understand where Supergirl is coming from. You know, from that first movie, she loves her dog Crypto. He's the only person that she really has a connection to, so you understand why she would want to find a cure for this dog. But it's a plot we've seen a million times before. Of you have a loved one who is sick, so you need to go and find the cure in like this land, in this like far off land. And I just find myself really like struggling to be invested in this, which is a shame, because Millie Alcock is excellent as the title character of Supergirl. She is able to play like sort of like the like just complete mess of a personality really, really well. She plays tired and just like out of it in this really, really fun way. She has a lot of funny lines in the movie. When her first big action scene, she's like very far from sober and like has to take out like this big alien monster while drunk, and just having her play like half asleep in a way. Really entertaining there. And when she has to sell the dramatic moments, she's also really, really great there. I think the scenes where I think my favorite flashback scenes in this movie are where you see her acting off of David Cornsweet, and you see her sort of like questioning like, well, what does it truly mean to be someone with these types of powers? What does it mean to protect these people that maybe aren't necessarily worth protecting? Are humans at the end of the day good people? And Millie Alcock sells everything really, really well. I think the scenes where she is acting with her Kryptonian parents, while I wasn't a big fan of those scenes, she is able to sell it really well. And watching this movie, even though I wasn't a big fan of this film, I do hope they continue to use her going forward, because I think this character, if written better or even just given a better story with just a more entertaining adventure, could be really, really effective. Eve Ridley plays the girl that is traveling with Supergirl. She's solid, not like this like amazing child performance, but still pretty good. There are maybe a few times in the movie where I was like, okay, I feel like they're giving her some material that is just a little bit above her talent, and like I just don't think any actor could have stole like the insane exposition they give her of like, my name is Ruth, I am the daughter of these alien prodigies, and Krem, the destroyer, destroy my parents, and if anyone teams up with me, I will give them the sword of my family. That is genuinely like verbatim a line in this movie for when she first meets Supergirl. So I don't really hold her against I don't really hold that against her for the fact that she didn't sell those lines very well, because honestly, who really could? But Millie Alcock is very, very good as Supergirl. The other major DC character that does show up in this movie is Jason Momoa as Lobo. Jason Momoa from the previous DC universe played Aquaman. There, here he is playing Lobo. Lobo is sort of like this sort of like unstoppable killing machine that sort of like killed all the other people on his planet, and now he just sort of goes on just certain like misadventures in order to just cause destruction. Jason Momoa is a lot of fun as this character. I don't think Jason Momoa is like the best actor in the world, but when you have him playing a character that is just there for like big bombastic personality and is just there to cause chaos, I think Lobo is really good there. At the same time, by the end of the film, Lobo shows up maybe like twice, and I didn't really understand why he was in this movie because he doesn't really add that much to the film. Even in like the climactic battle at the end, it doesn't really feel like he needed to be there. And I think it would have honestly mattered a lot more to the character of Supergirl if she was the only one fighting Krem at the end of the film. But I do digress. I do think Lobo was probably one of the highlights of this film, even though there aren't a ton. Yeah, speaking of the villain, the character of Krem reminds me of like old MCU villains and just how underdeveloped he is. When we first meet Krem, he just kills Ruth's parents and he has no real personality other than he's evil. He has these like dots on his face to let you know that he is this alien. Matthias Schoenaerts, who I do think is a good actor. I think he's very good in A Bigger Splash and other films, is given nothing to sink his teeth in with this role. And it really does feel like a very, very generic, like not even a villain. It's just an evil presence for our characters to get past in order to resolve the conflict in this film. And it really, really was a shame that the movie didn't have any sort of villain for Supergirl to really go up against. Because I think something that was so fun about the 2025 Superman movie is how good Nicholas Hoult was as Lex Luthor, and Krem is definitely not that. The action and the production, as I was watching this movie, I was just puzzled as to just how truly like flat and dull this movie looks. Like I think the lighting, every single like action scene is shot in like this really like gray undertone where you can't really see what's going on. So even if the action is like kind of decently directed, it's shot in such like a poorly lit way that I had a really tough time like telling everything that was going on. The first action scene that Lobo appears on, it involves Supergirl and Lobo fighting a bunch of Krem's men in this bar, and just with all the dust flying around and with all the shadows covering the action, I was genuinely having a tough time figuring out what was going on, and that has to do with a lot of just how this movie feels. I really was like puzzled as to how just bad I thought this movie looked from a lighting and a production design standpoint. The final planet that our characters go to, it looks like honestly like Thor: The Dark World, which I think is definitely one of the lesser MCU movies, just in terms of how cheap and flat everything looks. So very, very I'm very disappointed there. And then just when we get to the pacing of the third act, where we do have Supergirl seeming like her back is against the wall and she doesn't really know what to do, how just heavy this movie goes into just flashbacks towards the end. I think maybe the final 30 minutes of this movie is all flashbacks, and maybe except for maybe like 5 minutes of action, which was really, really unfortunate. It made the movie just feel like it was dragging down to a snail's pace. This movie is around an hour 48 minutes. It feels like easily over 2.5 hours, easily over 2 hours. And it's so funny because the Superman from last year was maybe a little over 2 hours, but it felt like it went by like that because James Gunn was able to put so much into this movie. This movie feels very bare with what it's dealing with, but it's stretching out all the small elements to make it feel like this really like thin layered film. And definitely was not a fan of that. Also, just a fairly like superficial complaint, but I gotta point it out. James Gunn is, if you saw the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, you know how much he loves his needle drops of putting in popular songs to maybe like add an extra layer of emotion to certain scenes. The needle drops in this movie, they aren't as like iconic of songs in general, so they really weren't as memorable. But there is one needle drop towards the end of the movie that just made me my eyes rolled to the back of my head with how bad of just how out of place this popular song was. I don't want to spoil what it is, but it definitely made me wondering, like, what are we doing here? And I think I think it might be time for James Gunn, if he is going to be producing all of these movies, to maybe dial it back on the needle drops if they're going to be this on the nose. But yeah, Supergirl, for the second movie in this big universe, it definitely left a lot to be desired. If I were to rate this movie on a scale of 0 to 10 videotapes, I'm going to give it a very flat 5 out of 10. Again, not many things I would really say are bad in this movie, and I do think Millie Alcock does keep this movie from being like a truly unwatchable film. But everything from the flat production design to the boring villain to just the really just like uninspired story, I felt myself really, really wanting more. As someone who is a fan of DC and who does think comic book movies are important to the culture, with especially coming off of how much they dominated the 2010s. Movies like this show that they really are. They really do seem like they are on the back burner, even if we do have things that I'm sure are going to be big, like Spider-Man: Brand New Day. It seems like a lot of these movies are turning out a lot like Supergirl, where it really just feels like they're becoming a little bit more of an afterthought. This isn't really a movie you have to go see. Even as good as Millie Alcock is, just in terms of the story, I would recommend, if you are gonna give it a watch, just wait for it to come on streaming or on 4K, because there really isn't much special here. But to go on to a movie I liked a lot more than that one, I'm going to be talking about Jackass Best and Last, directed by Jeff Tremaine. This is the 5th film in the Jackass franchise, 6th if you count the spin-off Bad Grandpa. If you don't know what Jackass is, these are movies that were based off the TV show from the late 90s, early 2000s, where Johnny Knoxville and a bunch of his friends just sort of made, like, it started out as like just like these skater bloopers where they would just show themselves like crashing from their skateboarding videos, and they just said, hey, why don't we just make videos of us doing like really, really stupid and painful things for the entertainment of us? Because if you watch the Jackass movies, you know a lot of the fun comes from listening to everyone behind the scenes laughing at them, and making for the entertainment of the viewing audience. And I'll be honest, I have loved every single Jackass movie. These are some of the most juvenile and inappropriate movies that I think anyone can really be a fan of. But I think there's just something so special about watching these groups of friends do the most asinine things to each other, whether it's stick a Hot Wheels car up one of their asses and go to a doctor's office to inspect it, or hold onto a giant rocket and light it and end up shooting off like 60 feet in the air into water, or whether it's just get trampled by bulls or get hit by a giant high five, or being put in a porta potty that is attached to a catapult and going all the way up and having all the shit just go up into these guys' mouths. It is so grotesque. And I totally understand it's not people's cup of tea. I love these movies. And yeah, Johnny Knoxville and the Jackass crew were very adamant in saying, hey, we're getting older. We can't really do these things that would be like these huge tolls on our bodies as we used to. So this one is going to be the last one, and it's probably going to be a shorter review, but I'll say it's a very, very effective finale. You have you have the entire crew back. You have Knoxville, you have Chris Pontius, you have Steve-O, my guy. You have Dave England, Danger Aaron. You have a bunch of the people from Jackass Forever, the new cast members, whether it's Poopy or whether it's some of the other new cast members. And this movie is half new stunts and half revisiting some of the older stunts from the previous films. And also some never behind the scenes stuff that is never aired in the on film. This movie opens with a stunt that was meant for the TV show, but MTV told the crew, hey, we can't show this on TV. And some of the most just like anxious humor I've had in a while, of just like truly at the edge of my seat, like these guys are going to die. And I've always given these guys credit for always putting just entertainment and humor at the forefront, and really just being willing to do anything to get a laugh out of people. And I really do think it's so fascinating. I talked last week about how the Toy Story movies are so fun because it really feels like I'm just hanging out with my friends with these characters. These movies are the exact same way, where I feel like when I watch Knoxville or Steve-O or Pontius, it really does feel like I'm hanging out with my friends and just doing stupid things with my friends, with them, just behind the camera. Again, one of my favorite things when I watch Jackass movie is when I'm watching the stunts happen, is while they're happening, when you're seeing these performers get insanely hurt, you hear everyone just laughing behind the scenes maniacally because they're all friends and they're all getting along, but they just take such pleasure in watching their friends just suffer in the funniest way. And I really find that entertaining. It's maybe a little disappointing with this being the last one that so much of it is dedicated to the older stunts. At the same time, I understand these guys are in their 50s now. They can't do the things of like getting like hit by a bull and flipping 3 times in the air and then face planting, because in the last one, I believe Knoxville got hospitalized. So they really are becoming limited. So I do understand this being the last one, but for a final film in a franchise, I think this was a really fun final way to go out. If I were to rate this movie on a scale of 0 to 10 videotapes, just for the experience alone, I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. If you were a fan of the Jackass movies, I highly recommend you go see this one. I don't think this is anywhere near the best one. I think either 2 or 4 is probably the best Jackass film. But if you have friends, I will always say these movies are best experienced in a theater with a bunch of people you get along with, and you are going to have such a fun time laughing your ass off. But I think that just about does it for our show this week. Thank you all for watching. Remember to like this video and subscribe to the video store. It helps grow our channel a lot. Next week, I think I'm going to be taking a week off, but I believe Minions and Monsters and Young Washington come out, so probably still going to be checking those out. But yeah, thank you all for tuning in, and as always, watch more movies.
And the award for most vapid film review of the century goes to...
Okay, movie review. Okay, I thought it was beauty.
And he's now in cinema hell, where one day we'll all be reunited.
This is me at the Regal Cinema crying as I did through much of the film.